Hello Harley Riders, thanks for joining us at the DK Custom Products video channel. My name's Kevin, the K in DK, and this is Devin, the D in DK. And today we're going to talk about a guy who got a pair of our NexGen shocks, which we're very proud of by the way, and thought something was wrong with them. So Devin, back a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, you had a guy show up at the shop because he had installed a pair of our NexGen shocks and they weren't riding well. He didn't feel like they were riding as good as he expected. He'd read all the reviews where people say they're unbelievable, they're fantastic, but he wasn't experiencing that, and he had actually gone to another shop first, which you're going to tell us about, and he was wondering if the NexGen were really all that. So tell us what happened in your interaction with this customer.
All right, so the customer was, thinking that the shocks were, should be doing a little bit more than what they were. He had trouble getting under the bike, getting around. He had some back surgeries, neck surgeries, I think even brain surgery. So, he was
this
elderly.
Was a trike, so...
Correct. It was a triglide.
Okay.
So anyway, he was having trouble getting under there. We had recommended, some preload adjustments to try to fine tune, the ride quality for him, his specific riding, preferences. And he was having trouble getting under there, so there was a reputable shop that was near him, so we recommended them. He took the bike to them.
And this was a big shop. They manufacture suspension components, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And he went to them and was just wanting to have what we had suggested, just the preload changed for him, just because he had trouble getting under the bike. So he had that done, rode a little bit better, but he still just didn't really think something was right. So he had contacted, us, and I had agreed that if he would bring it down, that we would take a look at it and get it, figure out what was going on and, get it squared away for him. So he come in and, I did as normal. The first thing I'm going to want to do is ride the bike. We got a little test circuit that I drive it on, and, rode it a million times. So I kind of know what to expect, how it's supposed to react and everything. And before I could even get out of the parking lot, there was a very odd noise coming from the rear of the bike. A little bit different than anything really that I'd ever heard before. I've heard a bunch of different noises, pan hard rods, the bearings wanting to move and stuff. And it was kind of similar to that, but not exactly like anything I had heard. So, he had ridden all the way from the other side of Atlanta, Georgia, I believe. So I was confident the bike was going to be okay, even though if it was my bike, I would have, it was noisy enough that it bothered me. But he had rode it that far, so I went on and did the test ride. And I come back and I asked him about it, and he actually had trouble hearing out of his left ear. And that's where the noise was coming from. And he said that he had heard a little bit of noise, but it wasn't very loud, but it was loud to me. And, he had bought the bike used. It was his first tri-glide, and that was just normal to him. He didn't realize anything was wrong, honestly.
So 2 questions. This had been making that noise, and the other manufacturer that he went to didn't say a word to him about it. And him being hard of hearing, he just heard it a little bit, not a lot. So the first thing that would have come to my mind is that it might have been like an axle bearing retainer plate. And for those of you who are not familiar with what an axle bearing retainer plate is, it is a weak link in the manufacturing of the Harley trikes. We have a whole video that we'll put up in the corner here, but we'll just play a little bit of that video right here where you can see. And that is, Harley just uses a cheap pot metal plate to hold the bearing into the hub.
Right.
Well, that plate, because of lateral forces, can get bowed, and then it doesn't hold that bearing in good anymore. And then that bearing can start flopping around, getting loose in there, and cause all kinds of problems. That the plates that are used to hold the bearing into the axle housing are really just cheap pot metal, and they tend to bow out, and then you can get some knocking noise. And of course, you've heard that because you developed the axle bearing retainer plates that we make before I was going on that trip to Bella Coola. And so we had heard that noise, and it wasn't that noise.
No, it was not.
Okay.
I wasn't sure exactly what it was. I thought it could have been the bearing trying to come apart. You know, like it was, I mean, it was bad.
It was bad.
Yeah, it was a really bad, yeah, like I thought that the wheel might be supposed to fall off or something. It was that bad. And as I was test driving it, I would actually notice when I was turning to the right, it would be more pronounced. When I would hit a bump, I would hear it. And anytime I would steer the bike to the right, which was putting more weight on the left-hand side, that's when the noise I could recreate it every time doing that. And then just regular bumps, and then the gravel in our parking lot, you know, I could hear it there. So I knew something was awry, you know, something wasn't right. So I come back and I told him and I asked him about it. And he, you know, told me that, you know, he had bought the bike used, everything like that. And also on that left-hand side, it had no pinstriping on the fender, which is an indicator that the fender had been replaced.
Right.
So he didn't know why or what had happened there. So I was thinking maybe it had been in an accident or something, and, you know, hit that wheel, you know, maybe that damaged the bearing. You know, I didn't really know at that time. So I just let him know that I was going to look his bike over and see what I found. So I just started jacking it up, taking the tires off, and went to looking. So I just started taking the tires off, jacking the bike up, and I was just going to look and see what I found. And I don't know, 30 seconds in, I saw that the panhard rod was actually had fallen down and was hitting the chunk, actually hitting basically the flywheel that the starter engages on for the reverse gear.
Panhard rod on the left-hand side was not even connected to the frame?
No, it was connected to both sides. Just both lock nuts were loose. And when both of them are loose, that panhard rod has a bend in it that it twisted down, and it kind of comes out, bends up at an angle, goes over, and then goes back in. Is kind of the route it takes. So it had twisted down and was touching the swing arm. Well, not the swing arm, but the rear chunk. So I saw that it was hanging down. It wasn't in the correct location, and the gem nuts were loose. So I didn't even think that was going to be all of the noise, or I didn't even know at that moment what all had transpired. But the more that I looked, the more I saw that it had been rubbing for a long time, and there was probably a 1/4 inch gouge in that solid panhard rod.
Really?
Where it had been rubbing the flywheel.
Wow. So, and this wouldn't have happened if one of the lock nuts was still tightened up against the heim joint. It couldn't have flipped and been down there. So both of them came loose.
Correct.
Okay.
And at that time, you know, I did all my other checks too. I looked around to make sure that it looked like nothing else was damaged or awry, or if that tire had been hit, that, you know, nothing looked bent or nothing like that. And I couldn't find any other evidence of any damage of any kind. So from that point, I just, you know, I told the customer what I found, and he about couldn't believe it. And I tried to take a picture, you know, with my phone. It's very hard to get in there. And
so you did all this with the body still on?
Correct.
You didn't take the body off?
The body stayed on the entire time. And once I did that, I got the panhard rod back adjusted in place and tightened back up and all of that stuff. And while I had it up, I knew that he had had the preload changed. And I was really thinking that it was probably didn't need to be changed. I mean, we set it, you know, before we send it out to the customer. And, you know, I do most of that testing, so I believe in those settings. And that was a problem with that, and it is no telling what was happening, what was binding up, what that was causing the suspension to do. So I went on and put it back to, you know, the setting that he received it in, as I was putting everything back together. And, you know, then I went for another test ride, you know, no noise, no nothing. Went on my same little loop, and I mean, it rode better. To me, it didn't seem to ride terrible to me, honestly. It just sounded bad. But My explanation for that is that it wasn't doing any bonding at that moment when I was driving it, but obviously it was sometimes with him. Mm-hmm. Because after I got done with it and you know the customer was going home, it got kind of late in the day. He was comfortable with everything. I mean, we talked a lot during this whole process. I mean, we kind of became friends, honestly. And he was comfortable. You know, I was comfortable that they were riding properly. He believed in that, and he was just gonna make his way back to where he was staying the night and gonna let me know how it went, as long as everything seemed fine for the first little while. And that night he texted me back or called me actually and said that that was amazing, the difference in it, and that's it must have been bonding because he was.
So that's crazy. A lot of people have trouble with the heim joints and end up replacing the heim joints. I've only had one heim joint replaced out of 3 different trikes that I've had. But a lot of people, will get a clunky noise because the heim joint gets loose. And I have heard of a lock nut, people taking the body off and looking at it, and one of the lock nuts being loose, but not both of them. This first time I've heard both of them coming loose, and the whole panhard rod just sort of flipping 180 degrees and then banging against the rear gear, reverse gear.
Yeah,
the reverse gear. Wow.
It wasn't actually 180 degrees. Normally it would be kind of pointed straight back, mm-hmm. and it just kind of fell down onto it.
Okay.
So it wasn't actually 180, but it was actually pretty interesting how easily it moved. Like with both of them loose, I could just reach up in there and grab it, and it was just floppy, just loose.
Wow.
Yeah, that could have ended bad. There's no telling what, if it had fully extended, bent down under it, and then tried to come up. Crazy stuff could have happened with that.
And so it probably didn't leave the factory that way. It probably was whoever worked on the bike previously, maybe when they replaced the fender, maybe whoever he had put the shocks in, who knows. What's a little bit crazy to me is this manufacturer that he went to, suspension manufacturer he went to, did not notice that the panhard rod was in the wrong place. That's a little bit crazy. But Evan, I'm glad you were able to help him out and get him back on the road, riding with the NexGen shocks, performing how they're designed to perform. I know that after he rode a little bit, he sent you a text. We're not going to read the whole text, but just portions of the text. What did he say?
Said, they say you can't make new old friends, but it felt like I did in 6 hours. Thank you for all of your help and spending time explaining everything so I could understand easily. My ride home was about 350 miles. There is no doubt that the hitting and bonding situation was my problem. I am much happier now with the shocks. I am still amazed at how well it handles. I did 98 twice on the way home, and it was steady as if I was doing 50. Thanks again, and remember the conversations are in the vault. Oh, and by the way, you definitely married up. So some of that, so obviously some of that was, personal there, and what's in the vault stays there. And Steve, if you're listening, I very much enjoyed that and hope you're doing well.
Thanks for tuning in to another DK video. This illustrates if you have an unidentified noise on your bike, you need to take the time to track it down and see what it is. This was a pretty serious deal. A lot of times it's not so serious, but this is a pretty serious deal. Like Devin said, it could have had some pretty catastrophic consequences if that panhard rod had twisted around even more. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to our channel already, if you could, we'd appreciate it. It helps us out a lot. Doesn't cost you anything. Also, if you hit that notification bell, you'll know when we release a new video. And lastly, if you could please share the video with your friends, it might help them out. They might find it interesting.
Y'all ride safe out there.